TV.
Hey everybody, Catsynth TV! And today we are talking about the GX-80, the brand new flagship instrument from our friends at Cherry Audio. It is based on both the Yamaha GX1 and CS-80. We will be discussing the history of these legendary instruments before delving into the features of the GX-80 in detail. As always, please do consider supporting us via Patreon or Ko-Fi so that we can continue to bring you these synthesizer demos and tutorials. Links in the description below. In 1975, Yamaha released its flagship polyphonic analog synthesizer, the GX1. Its design was modeled on leading electric organs of the time, with two full-size keyboard consoles, a smaller solo keyboard, and a pedal board. Each of these manuals, or ranks as they were called, had its own dedicated analog oscillator voice, with 8 notes of polyphony, multiple waveforms, high-pass and low-pass filters, envelopes, and VCA. One unique feature was that the pulse and sawtooth waveforms each had their own dedicated filters for even more oscillator variety. Despite this awesome power, the GX1 was primarily a preset instrument, though one could program additional tone modules with a separate device. Only a few GX1s were actually made, and they cost about as much as a typical house in the 1970s. It was famously used by Keith Emerson in numerous projects over the years, as well as by John Paul Jones of Led Zeppelin for the album In Through the Outdoor, one of my cat Big Merp's favorite albums. About a year later, Yamaha released the CS-80. It had a single keyboard and 2 ranks, each similar in voice architecture to the GX1. The CS-80 also opened up programming to the front panel and polyphonic aftertouch. Yes, folks, polyphonic aftertouch in 1976. The CS-80 was featured by many composers and musicians at the time, perhaps most notably the composer Vangelis, in his scores for Blade Runner and Chariots of Fire. The CS-80 remains prized to this day and commands high prices, though perhaps not as high as the GX1. And while it was much lighter and even considered portable in comparison to the GX1, it still weighed in at a massive 200 pounds. The GX80 combines features of both the GX1 and CS80 in a single instrument. The overall look and feel resembles the CS80. We see 2 ranks, each with independent VCO, filters, VCA, and envelopes. The filters and VCA each have their own envelope. There is the global section with parameters that affect both ranks, various tuning parameters, the ring modulator, the LFO, which Yamaha decided to call a sub-oscillator for some reason, and the tone selector, which has several hard-coded voice settings from the CS80. We'll come back to those later. The performance section includes parameters for voice assignment and polyphony, the ribbon controller, and settings for the layer modes. Finally, there is an effects section, which contains several different effects that can be turned on or off via these switches next to the keyboard. Right now we are in CS80 mode with a single layer and 2 ranks. This is indicated by the single layer mode button. If we want to make it like the GS1 with 4 ranks, we press dual. There, now we have 4 ranks. Ranks 1 and 2 are in the upper layer. We can switch to the lower layer to see ranks 3 and 4. When viewing the lower layer, the borders around the sections turn orange like this. We see ranks 3 and 4 with their independent voice parameters. The lower layer also has its own global parameters and effects. There is also a split mode, where the lower layer is on the lower part of the keyboard and the upper layer above the split point. Okay, now let's go back to single mode. We are now listening to the default sound, which is mostly based on a sawtooth wave on rank 1. An easy way to start programming the voices is to use the tone selectors. These were built-in presets found on the CS80 that have been recreated here. While not technically presets on the GX80, they are a quick way to set voice parameters. So if we select string 1 here, we see the parameters on rank 1 change. If we press panel for rank 1, we see they change back to their previous settings. Let's try out a few of these. String 2 is a nice string tone. Let's try this clavinet. Now, if we wiggle any of the parameters on rank 1, we see that the tone selector goes back to panel. Let's try this flute tone. Doesn't really sound like a flute, but it's nice. So let's keep that and turn our attention to rank 2. In order to hear both ranks at the same time, set the mix slider to halfway. And now let's bring in this brass sound. Tweak a few parameters on rank 1. Turn off rank 1 just to hear the brass sound on rank 2. And turn it back on. Nice. Now let's go all in and bring up dual mode to program all 4 ranks for a big GX1 style sound. We can now use tone selectors on ranks 3 and 4. First, let's solo out the lower layer. Try this funky setting. And this organ on rank 4. Set the mix to hear both ranks at the same time. Tune it a little bit. Now unsolo the lower layer to hear both layers and all 4 ranks at once. Spread things out a bit by adjusting the pitches. Go back to the upper layer and do some fine-tuning. Let's look at the touch bar, a distinctive feature of both the GX1 and CS-80. It's used as a continuous pitch bend, where the starting pitch is wherever you first touch it. Touch in a different spot to get more upward bend. Or touch down on the right end to bend all the way down. I love that. Let's bring in some effects for the upper layer. This will only affect ranks 1 and 2. Add some delay and flange. Now go to the lower layer, add some chorus and reverb that will only affect ranks 3 and 4. As you can see and hear, we have built up a big, thick analog sound without really a whole lot of effort. So you can do a lot on the GX80 even without going deep into the individual voice parameters. Now before we do that, I want to show you split mode. Here the lower layer is below a keyboard point, C4 by default, and the upper layer is above it. Let's look at the lower layer, set rank 3 to clavinet and rank 4 to this brass tone. Tweak some oscillator and filter parameters. Set the feet control for rank 4. Cool. Now let's play this bass sound against the upper layer that we already programmed. I like what we came up with here. It has an early 80s post-disco sound. Let's save it. Now let's reset to the default preset, which is in single mode. I'm also going to turn off rank 2 and focus on rank 1 to explore the voice parameters in more detail. Let's start with the VCO. It has two basic waveforms, pulse and saw, which can be turned on and off with these rocker switches. Now, something important to note are these orange sliders. These represent parameters that were only found on the GX1 and not on the CS-80. The voice architecture is really a blend of both instruments. Okay, let's start with just the plain sawtooth. Turn down the VCA release. There we go. Now we can use these sliders to add some interesting things. First, we can add a triangle wave 2 octaves above the sawtooth. The triangle works even if you turn off the sawtooth. Now this is one of those features that was found just on the GX1 and not on the CS-80. Another GX1 feature is a resonant bandpass output for the sawtooth, which we can access with these sliders. Bring the main sawtooth back in. And now the triangle. The sound is a bit organ-like. Now let's turn all of these down and look at the pulse waveform. This is basically a pulse or square wave. There are pulse width modulation options. We can change the duty cycle of the waveform. And bring in pulse width modulation with a dedicated LFO. Now, just like the sawtooth, the pulse has an additional path, this time with a dedicated high-pass filter. Now let's bring back the sawtooth and its related features, and we get this super fat oscillator sound. Now let's turn our attention to the VCF or filter section. The filter has two modes modeled after the CS-80 and GX1 respectively. Let's stick with the CS-80 for now. There is a resonant high-pass filter with cutoff and resonance controls, and a low-pass filter. The filters have a dedicated envelope for controlling cutoff. Now, envelopes on the GX80 are a little different than what we usually see. There is no sustain, but there is an initial level for where the envelope starts relative to the cutoff values. There is a decay step to the level of the filter cutoff controls, and release goes back to the initial level. Note that initial level decreases as you move the slider upward. Set the attack, decay, and release. The envelope controls both high pass and low pass at the same time, so if we add back the high pass filter, we end up with something like a band pass. That's a pretty cool sound. Let's take a quick look at the VCA section. There's an input level from the VCF. Turn it down, and we got nothing. Now again, there is a 3-stage envelope dedicated to the VCA. Now there's also an interesting set of parameters to set aftertouch controls specific to the rank. As mentioned earlier, the CS-80 and GX1 were famous for having polyphonic aftertouch back in the 1970s. The brilliance sliders are an offset for the cutoff of both the high-pass and low-pass filters at the same time, and level is the amount of aftertouch applied. Turn these up and play with aftertouch on the keyboard. Now, of course, you can't see me playing aftertouch. You'll just have to take my word for it. Let's bring in rank 2. In order to hear rank 2, we have to bring the mix control to its midpoint or lower. Now, one parameter in the VCA that we forgot to show with rank 1 is the sine wave. This is a sine wave mixed directly into the VCA, bypassing the filters. So if I turn off the VCF input, we just hear the sine wave. Set the mix to the midpoint to hear both ranks together. Now let's look at some of the master functions that operate on both ranks. We can slightly detune either rank. Like a lot of things here, moving detune upward actually makes it lower. Detuning like this adds just a little bit of extra texture to the sound. Now we get to one of my favorite features, the ring modulator. The CS-80 had a unique dedicated analog ring modulator function. It uses a low-frequency sine wave to modulate the mix from both ranks. Use mod to turn it up. Okay, let's turn the ring mod off. The feet controls provide coarse settings for the pitch of each rank. These are measured in organ feet rather than in octaves or semitones. And now let's look at the sub-oscillator, which, as we mentioned earlier, is really just Yamaha's fancy word for LFO. Okay, let's bring down the sub-oscillator depth, make it a bit more civilized. Nice. So now we're going to take a look at the effects section. There are 4 effects slots with dedicated effects in each. You can turn each effect on and off with these rocker switches. Let's start with the first one, which can be a chorus or a rotary speaker. By default, it's set to chorus. There are controls for the speed and depth. A nice lush sound there. Try the rotary speaker, which is essentially a Leslie effect. Notice that these parameter sliders turn off. Only the faster slow modes are available. Alright, turn that off and look at the flanger and phaser. Again, this is an effect where we switch between 2 modes. Turn on flange. It has parameters for speed, depth, and feedback. Let's try it with some default tone settings. Now let's turn to the phaser, which has the same speed, depth, and feedback parameters. Let's go back to our original voice settings by pressing panel for both ranks. See, it's kinda cool that the GX80 saves those for us. I'm quite fond of phasers. Let's look at the delay section. Again, there are 2 modes, a digital delay and an analog tape delay. We'll start with digital. Now let's try tape mode. And finally, the reverb. We can have multiple effects on at once. Let's bring back in that phaser that I really like. Okay, now that we've explored most of the parameters on the front panel, let's bring back dual mode. Go to the lower layer to see ranks 3 and 4. Let's solo out the lower layer while we work with them. Remember, the lower layer has its own master section and its own effects. Let's go back to the tone selector and start with this harpsichord on rank 3. Now let's use this Funk 4 setting on rank 4. Mix both ranks together. Alright, let's add some effects. Specifically, let's turn on chorus. Alright, and with that, let's turn off lower solo to hear both layers, or all 4 ranks at once. Let's have a little fun and bring back our friend the ring modulator. Go back to the upper layer, bring in the ring modulator here as well, but set its attack and decay times to be different. Now Vangelis we ain't, but I like what we've come up with here. It's quite unique, so I'm gonna save it. As we've shown, the GX80 offers a lot of degrees of freedom and the ability to build up very complex sounds. Let's hear what some of the pros do with it in the factory presets. We hope that you've enjoyed this detailed look at the new GX80 and have some ideas how to use it in your own music. To find out more, please visit cherryaudio.com and check out the description below this video. Thanks for watching, and please subscribe to CatSynth TV.